All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Casey Labonte, and I'm the Food as Medicine Program Coordinator with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. Welcome to our panel discussion on food as medicine with a focus today on cultural practices. Let's start off with some introductions. And Kelly, why don't you go first?
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for having me. As Casey stated, my name is Kelly Dundon. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I currently practice as a mental health therapist, primarily with adults. And I'm also a support line supervisor at Fireside Project, a free psychedelic support line. I am based in Northwest Arkansas and have lived in this area on and off for about 14 years. I first encountered this group and got to know Casey and other colleagues at Iowa State through a project that was looking at the resilience of local food systems in the face of natural disasters and extreme weather, climate change, and COVID-19. I became interested through this work in how local food systems and farming communities respond to these scenarios and what kind of supports exist that are helpful and what is still needed to respond to these events and continue to develop resiliency. Through this exploration, and perhaps because I always have my social worker hat on, it became so apparent that mental health was not part of this conversation. It also became very apparent that farmers are a highly underrepresented demographic in the mental health space, including farm workers, and yet they're some of the folks that are most in need of this type of care. So through this work with Iowa State, we had some conversations and interviews where I learned more about the specific ways that farmers are so isolated from larger communities and resources that include access to healthcare providers, including mental health providers. So when I think about farmers, I think about their resilience. I think about their necessity in our communities. I think about how much we rely on them to feed us and to feed our families. But I also think about the amount of risk, strain, and unpredictability that is often so inherent to their work. Um, and there's also this component of the generational pressure and expectations that are often exist in farming communities, as well as this connection to the earth, faith in their growing practices, connection with nature, and all of these factors that make farming so um, heartfelt, so personal, but also so challenging. So I am excited to be here with you all and to share more and to learn more about your work and perspectives.
Thank you, Kelly. And Judy, whenever you're ready to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. My name is Judy Walden, and my work is with communities, primarily rural communities, entrepreneurs, and local leaders who want to develop or expand their cultural offerings for travelers. They're responding to a rapidly growing interest from travelers who are looking for ways to experience the stories, the culture, and the heritage, and the arts that help communicate a distinctive sense of place. Destinations see promise in those traveler connections as part of the future economic strength of their community. Food, 3 times a day, every day, is a powerful component in making inroads into understanding unfamiliar cultures. So within America, the unfamiliar cultures may be the rural culture, right? And the urban culture, as well as more indigenous or ethnic cultures. Those of us in the travel industry are constantly reminded that people travel on their bellies and that food is a key element we use everywhere to open those opportunities to connect. People travel for very profound personal reasons: to break destructive habits of daily life, to find a stimulus for change, or to heal. That's why I'm here.
Great. Thank you both so much for those introductions. I think it helps set the tone for our conversation to understand who one another is and why we are here in this Zoom room together. So our first question that is not a introduction question is, can you please describe what food as medicine means to you? And if you have images prepared, you should be able to share your screen. And Judy, would you like to go first for this one?
My first introduction to food as medicine came through water as medicine. I lived most of my adult life in Colorado and had the extraordinarily good fortune of living in two mountain towns that had natural hot springs, Steamboat Springs and Glenwood Springs. Steamboat had a lap pool, a natural Lithia Springs, and Strawberry Park Hot Springs, where I cross-country skied on many moonlit nights. Glenwood Springs boasts the country's biggest outdoor hot springs pool and the vapor caves, where Ute people brought themselves and their horses to soak out the joint stiffness of winter. While living in these two communities, taking the waters was my primary medicine, and I stayed healthy. The leap from waters to food as medicine came through international business as our travel company offered specialty groups from the cultural connections international visitors wanted in the US. I connected quilters groups, symphony orchestras, diplomatic groups, farmers, and students with American homestays. Colorado, Wyoming, and South Dakota international trade offices had a partnership with United Airlines that took a group of us 4 times a year to Tokyo, Osaka, Seoul, Taipei, and Hong Kong. In Hong Kong and Taipei, I watched as members of the sales team dipped out to confer with their Chinese medicine doctor. At the same time, I developed a love for Japanese cuisine, eating everything in sight and consistently losing 5 pounds a week. I came to regard my time in Japan not only as a joy, but a healing. It was not one food, it was a cuisine. The tofu, the soba noodles, the fish, the cuisine was a tonic for my Western diet and to the Western rhythms of our eating and living. I'm now having a similar experience in Minnesota, where a new restaurant, Owamni, was introduced 2 years ago by Chef Sean Sherman, who calls himself the sous chef. This indigenous cuisine is pre-colonial food of the Northern Plains, where the buffalo and the high plains shaped a food that resonates for what ails many of us today. What is served? Buffalo, vegetables, greens, berries, and beans. No sugar, no flour, no butter. This restaurant is fine dining, and people must still wait over 2 months for an available restaurant, an available reservation. In 2023, Owamni was named the best new restaurant in the US by the James Beard Foundation, followed by an award from the Julia Child Foundation the next year. This is not one food. It too is a cuisine. Last week, after a meal at his new takeout restaurant called the Indigenous Food Lab, it stirred in me that same lateness, that same connection to earth I felt on all those trips to Japan. That's what food as medicine means to me.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for preparing those slides. They were awesome.
Thank you. You can see why I wanted to find them.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Absolutely. Oh, well, now I'm hungry, Judy. All this great.
We can heal that hunger.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will share my screen again. I'm realizing now, if I share that, if I share this, I won't be able to see my notes. So is it okay to just leave it like that?
Yeah, it's taking up almost the full screen, so
Okay.
totally visible.
Okay, cool. So, um, yeah, so what does food as medicine mean to me? So first, I want to acknowledge that so much of what I know about this topic, what I've learned and what I've continued to learn, comes from my teachers, my colleagues, such as you, both mentors, peers, scholars, and educators, as well as lived experience. So I feel really honored and humbled to be able to speak about this topic with such thoughtful and insightful individuals as the pair of you. Um, in that same spirit, I want to offer credit to the concept of this image, which came from Fireside Project, which is also linked at the bottom of the image. So they use a different sort of version of this. And I was really inspired by that. And it started to click into place with me that a similar concept could be used in this conversation about food as medicine. So, as I think about food as medicine and as I look at this image, I think of all of the layers and influences and systems that impact the individual, the consumer, the eater. I think about how food as medicine can be different things at each level. So, here we have this image of the individual sort of at the center, and then there's all these layers or systems, if you will, that build out from the individual and they get broader, and that sort of encompass more communities, more people, and even more power. So we have the individual that branches out to their home and their family. We then have their communities, whether that be a work environment, their actual like geographic community, a school community, perhaps a faith or a spiritual community. Um, and thinking about food as medicine in particular, I started to then think about the farmers, the producers, the distributors that sort of build out from there, that actually deliver food to these communities, that provide those food options, that choice. Again, I started to think about, okay, what is that sort of next layer of where we get food? And so I thought about institutions like schools, I thought about hospitals, um, all of those public spaces where we consume food. And then beyond that, lawmakers, regulatory bodies, governments that sort of regulate our food, that have a lot of power and influence on where food goes, how we access it, how much it costs, the quality, the safety of our food, all of those things. And then I started to build out and think more about like sort of these meta aspects of it, capitalism, how, price and cost and supply and demand and all of these pieces influence how in the US especially, we navigate food, we navigate the consumption and the purchasing of food. And then I started to think about ancestors and tradition in the past and culture and how that influences how we prepare food, how we think about food, how we ritualize food, how we even label foods good or bad or healthy or not.
Yeah.
And so, in this image, I hope to sort of um, illustrate all of these different layers that influence food and that influence our consumption, and how food as medicine can really um, come in at any layer and have a different meaning, and take a different form. So I thought about at the community level, we might see food as medicine turn up in how we have celebratory gatherings, or as we spoke about earlier, rituals, and how we might use specific foods or special foods, or a practice around food that is really meaningful to that gathering or to that ritual or to that community. I also thought about at the institutional level how we might see that food as medicine could look like engaging in local and regional food sourcing that is representative of the people who will consume that food, and of the community that it represents. Another example at the individual level It means having self-determination to choose what you eat, how you eat it, and when, and really being able to have that autonomy in your food choices. And then at a sort of broader level, at a cultural level, when we think about capitalism, when we think about ancestry, the past, we can think about food as medicine as dismantling systems of oppression that are counter to these principles of food as medicine, such as food sovereignty, self-determination, um, rituals, celebratory foods, local foods, things like that, and how at these higher levels, at the institutional level, for example, as well, how we can reduce barriers to food access and food choice. So I see food as medicine in all of these different layers. I think there are some common values and some themes that we'll talk about more, but that really can come in at any place. On the left, I also depicted some ideas, influences, and themes which both help and harm the concept and practices as food as medicine. So, in the sun, we have things like right relationship, and that may mean right relationship with those that we work with, those that we serve, or right relationship with the plants that are being grown that provide us food, or the farmers that grow that food for us. I also think about things like reparations. I think about care, just really caring for those that we work with, those that we seek information from, those that we seek expertise and education from. I think about the natural world, how we interact with that, especially in the concept as food as medicine. Again, this comes with respect, intention, reciprocity, which I want to talk about more later, equity, justice, and liberation. And then, of course, we have this sort of cloud of these other forces that may hinder our practices of food as medicine, but that they're here. We can acknowledge them, we can name them, they're present. So things like capitalism, patriarchy, colonization, fear, racism, and white supremacy. And so I see these themes, these pieces as also being in direct opposition to food as medicine. So I think that that's also important to name. Um, I'd also like to add in closing with this image that I don't see all of these systems as entirely linear or occurring in this exact and predictable fashion. This is just the way that my mind started to wrap around this concept. And I hope it's a useful image for you all as well.
Hmm.
And I will stop sharing that now.
I like it.
Love it. Beautiful.
Yeah, really. What a comprehensive um, circular organization, a flowing organization of those thoughts. It was lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. One other thing I'll add is that these bowls or cups, these nesting cups, I really like this idea that all of these systems serve to hold the individual. And ultimately, like everything that occurs on all of these levels is to eventually like impact the individual. And so I try to keep that in mind of like, how is this serving, impacting the end user, I guess you would say, the person. And so I like this idea of like the nesting and the holding and the building out that each layer sort of holds the next within it.
Beautiful.
Mm.
It's a great app. Have you heard of the social ecological model?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
that, but
yeah,
much more beautifully spoken. And I love that idea of holding the individual in the center of it all.
totally. Yeah. Yeah, that's my social worker heart. We're always like thinking about like all of these different systems and how they interact with one another and how they impact the individual. So yeah, thanks for calling that to mind.
My public health heart rests in the social ecological model, usually as well.
Nice. That's
If you have
awesome.
any other comments or questions for each other's presentations and comments, then now is a great time for that.
Yeah, Judy, I
Well,
really
that is- Go
to
ahead.
thank you for your presentation. I really I loved all the images and I loved the way that you shared your personal story through food and through experiencing these other cultures and learning about these different ways of food, as how it impacted your understanding of your own health and your own well-being. And I thought that that was really relatable and that resonated with me. So I appreciate you sharing that a lot.
One of the things that I'm looking at in my personal life now is it's part of a family system, but our mother had Alzheimer's for 10 years before she died.
Mhm,
And so, I'm probably up next. I mean, the
mm,
possibility is there. So I'm looking at this realistically
mm,
and have become involved in a group that says that Alzheimer's, as well as many of the other big, diseases that affect our society, um, can be reversible or it can become optional in the future.
mhm,
And the approach is primarily that it's designed by this man named Dale Bredesen.
mm,
And he's a researcher that says, if you have Alzheimer's, there can be 36 holes in the roof.
mhm,
Then you patch those 36.
mm,
Most powerful is food.
mhm. Yeah.
And what, I'm thinking about my extended family and to say to them, when you start young and look at what you're doing with food, you can make this right, not inevitable,
Mhm,
right, in terms of genetics or family history. I'm finding it fascinating. And as part of it, my sister and I are part of a coaching group, a group coaching group, and we hear other people who have been starting to use the system and what's
mhm,
happened to them. And they're actually reversing
mhm,
some of the memory loss, some of the things that we all fear.
mhm,
So it's been very interesting to me, and I'm in the midst of it right now in terms of this study, saying what practices do I need to change in my life?
mhm.
And there are many practices, of course, exercise.
Yeah.
The big ones are food, and guess what the other one is?
Mm.
Connectedness.
Okay.
And that's what you see in terms of the research that's coming out about these blue zones around the world where people live to be over 100.
Right. Right.
Food and connectedness.
Yeah.
I think that's a great segue into our next question, which is about the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mhm,
Speaking of connectedness, and how we're wondering how has the COVID-19 pandemic influenced the integration of food as medicine principles into your work? And
mhm.
Kelly, if you would like to go first for this one.
Sure. Yeah. So I came to this work with Iowa State past, I guess, the onset of COVID. So it was later in, I want to say like 2021. And so prior to that, Iowa State had collected some really great data from farmers and local just food systems people in our sort of two county region, Benton and Washington County in Northwest Arkansas. And so I want to just name some of the things that were written in that report that speak about the COVID-19 impact on our local food system. And so, kind of like bolded in big words, is the most significant impact for individuals was being unable to see others and the mental stress that COVID-19 caused. So, I think that that's huge, right? Because we can certainly talk about supply chain, we can talk about distribution, access to food, all of these things very, very relevant, very important. But that what rose to the top for folks was that mental stress. There's also this question of what will the future hold regarding the food system, and what conversations do we need to have around that. Another great line from this report is amidst all of it, one thing that has been constant, a hope for change. So again, I just hear in this similar to what Judy said, like this idea of connection, but also this idea of mental well-being, feeling safe, and maybe what is coming next, or at least having that hope that there is going to be some support, and some sort of resolution. So I'll speak. So that occurred really before I joined this work with Iowa State. So I will also speak about my work just as a mental health therapist. And I think first and foremost, COVID-19 interrupted our ability to be in community with others, to gather, to congregate, and to share space. So, in my understanding of food as medicine, being in community with others and with the land is absolutely vital. So, I think this was really the first interruption we all felt in the midst of COVID. So in my work, the next thing I started to notice was this othering that occurred through the pandemic, through quarantines, vaccines. All of this gave us a reason to point at the other person and say, you're wrong or you're doing this wrong. And so when I think about food as medicine and this value of community, so much of it is driven by self-determination and the rights of individuals to make decisions on their behalf and on behalf of their families. But when it came to COVID, we really like struck this balance of like, how do we understand and respond to our own needs, wishes, and preferences in a way that is also safe and supportive to the collective and to our community. So there's this big push and pull there, um, which I think is still unresolved, but became more evident. COVID did, however, illuminate this stark and undeniable way that we are all connected. And I'd like to read a short quote from a book called The Ethics of Caring by Kylia Taylor. And she shared, "We are all inextricably linked to the web of life. The fact that we're all in this together, and not only socio-political systems and ethnic groups, but all beings." To me, this just became so evident without a shadow of a doubt that individual choices do have an impact on the collective. And we also witness the intensity and the speed at which we are exposed to that connection as we understood more and more how the virus spread. I really see this as this sort of like double-edged sword, and I think perhaps others do too. On one hand, we see that we are connected, we see that we are one, and that we really can't fully be separate from the whole or from others. And I think the double-edged side is some find this beautiful, they find this inspiring, they find connection through that, and others may find that this is sort of terrifying and feeling sort of trapped and not being able to really have maybe autonomy in the way that they would like. So, in this work, I found that I encountered more and more people through the food systems work, through mental health therapy, through COVID, who got inspired to find new ways to serve their communities, to know their neighbors, to spend time in nature, to even grow their own food or take more care for how they prepare food and nourish themselves. So I think for many, maybe they learned this through a sense of spirituality, connection with the universe, connection with others, connection with all living beings. And for some, this was like an awakening that just rocks their world. And for others, I think it's a shift that we're all still sort of trying to reckon with and understand and integrate. Yeah.
Thank you. Judy, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, in my work, which is looking at developing community-based tourism, which, suggests connections and suggests connectedness, it has to be there. Because everything's sparse. There aren't that many restaurants. Usually if there's a diner, there's one at one end of town and one at the other end of town. The menus are similar. These are things that travelers are not accustomed to. They're accustomed to choice. They're accustomed to people saying, do you want this? Do you want that? So all of a sudden they were going out, not for exploration or entertainment or even indulgence. They were going out because they didn't have just cabin fever, right? They were desperate for a fresh, fundamental change, fresh air, fresh food, right? Something that made them feel that everything was going to be okay. So in droves, they gathered themselves up from urban centers and headed off into small communities. And what was revealed is what people who have worked in rural tourism for a long time know, that in many places, in most places, the infrastructure is not yet ready to take care of the expectations or the demands of travelers. So they found that, the diners were closed at 6 o'clock because people had to go home to their own families and do it again the next day. And there they were in the middle of what felt like the middle of nowhere with no place to buy dinner, right? Things weren't open, right? People weren't thinking about what they needed as travelers. They were thinking about what they needed for their families and for their own lives. And in terms of the supplies they needed, right? Things they hadn't thought about before they left town, right? Nobody in small towns was thinking about, well, let's put those up so that people can at least get the supplies they need. So the mismatch between the expectation of travelers that we'll find what we need when we get there, right? And then for travelers saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could tap into economic possibilities of people who are passing through town? Or even the possibilities of people who are taking part in, which is in the biggest trend in tourism in America, is outdoor recreation. People passing through to a state park, right? National park, doing whatever they want to do, bicycle, hike, etc. Meanwhile, the impact on those protected areas was just incredible. There weren't enough people didn't know how to camp, right? They didn't know what they needed to take with them. They left a mess behind, right? And again, that lack of understanding of what travelers needed, because that was the experience they had, and what the countryside had to offer was completely different. It's very interesting. I'll talk later in one of the other questions about some very interesting research that the U.S. Tour and Travel Service out of the U.S. Commercial Department has found. And they said across groups, whether they're young, old, international, domestic, we see two huge trends. And the trends are, one, people want to go to lesser known destinations, right? Instead of New York City, someplace in New York State, instead of, right, lesser known destinations. The other thing is people are looking for authenticity. So here we are, sitting like ducks saying, okay, here's the opportunity. What do we do next? So this is I used to laugh when I'd see the statistics that came out of the US travel and trade statistics. They ask on airplanes, what would you like to do? And a huge number of people who were flying in from international destinations would tick the box, visit charming small towns. Or they'd tick, visit Native American communities. So these aspirations, these hopes to learn about something that they don't know about now is there. But those charming small towns, it takes some major change to be ready for the expectations that people have for an overnight stay, 3 meals a day, and activities morning, afternoon, and evening. So that's what the pandemic did. It really opened that up for people saying, wow, do you think we really can do tourism? Can we get ready for this? Because they were impacted by so many people that gathered themselves out and headed into the countryside. So that's what I saw in terms of the work I did.
Sharing that.
I'm curious, Judy, if I can ask, how, you mentioned something about folks wanting to go to, charming towns or rural communities for this authenticity or for this novel experience. And then at the same time, those communities not necessarily having the infrastructure to be able to support all of their needs, especially at such like an increasing rate. And so I wonder, I'm sure it's different for each place, but how communities are able to maintain that like novelty, that authenticity, while also navigating like being able to have the food, being able to have the services to host so many new tourists. Does that make sense? Like how they find that balance?
Right. So finding that balance is the toughest thing ever.
Mhm.
And the part of the day that's the hardest is the late dinner hour, what to do between dinner and bed.
Mhm.
And for a lot of places, you know, the lodging is difficult as well. How do you maintain lodging for what, you know, can be busy during the travel season for, but probably not for the rest of the year. So
Mhm.
it takes, it, it takes a village to make tourism work in rural areas. And there are places that are making it, and it's not done overnight. It's understanding with the people who are there that if they think that they'd like to, you know, make lunch or offer lunch, who do they have to partner with, right? So that people feed them travelers during the lunch hour. You know, they need to partner with what happens before and after.
Mhm. Mhm.
The rest of the community needs to support them.
Yeah.
Uh, So takes a village,
Mhm. Yeah.
but there's no shortage of imagination, of new visions. I've
Mhm.
never gone into a town where I haven't had people who have lived there for a long time saying, do you think we could da 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 da? Right? I've always wondered about da 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 da. I can't get this idea out of my mind. Da 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 da. The creative urge is there.
Yeah.
Just because it's tough doesn't make it go away. The other thing that doesn't make it go away for rural communities is that so many communities that I work with and are people that love their connection to place, the
Mhm.
sense of place, the sense of who they are relative to the land they're on, right,
Mhm.
is so powerful. And as the ag industry, right, gets more corporate, right, and changes, and they're finding a harder way to make a living that way, what else is possible?
Right.
Tourism's possible.
Mm.
So that's the other thing, right? Is that people, that powerful force to stay put,
Mhm.
make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that sentiment of, I love how you said that, Judy, just because it's tough doesn't make it go away, leads
Mhm.
us beautifully into our next question about how changing weather patterns have influenced the integration of food as medicine principles in your work. Judy, if you'd like to get us started on that one, because you're already on a roll here. Keep
I'm on a roll here. Okay, so I'm going to take us next then to Hawaii, where this horrific wildfire killed 100 people in Maui, in one of the most sacred places in all the islands, um, devastated the community, physically, but also emotionally. And I got connected to this because one of the things I do each year is to help teach an online class from Georgetown University in Introduction to Cultural Heritage Tourism, especially Indigenous tourism. And there were people that right after this event were in the class and just with this raw emotion talked about what it was like to look around and lose the most sacred thing for a whole culture, not only their own families, but their own relatives. So that led me to like really, I was really alert to what was going on and communicating with one of the women who said, would you like to listen in on the conference we're having about what to do next? Right. And of course, this leads us, I was going to talk about this in terms of the two-eyed seeing, right? But this really leads to, there were two things that came up. The first thing was, we have got to rebuild. Our jobs are all around tourism. And the other was, we are an agricultural community, right? This is our home, our land, right? our sea. For visitors, it's their playground. And this line, I can tell you word for word because it stayed with me ever since. And this one man said, you know, people come here and they chase our dolphins and they want to play themselves, right? Play with the dolphins, play, do everything we have to play, right? But this is our home. And we are an agricultural people. And if we want to continue in tourism, we've got to figure out a way to help visitors participate in and experience our agricultural way of life. Not just the playground that they see us as right now. Wow, there it was. They're still struggling with it, of course, to this day. It's not that many months away. So to me, you know, there's a weather pattern, and it's the most dramatic and most contemporary example that I can bring.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. I really like how you use that word participate, how tourists can find ways to participate rather than just, I don't know, consume or just that play.
So tourism is moving slowly. It's a giant, you know, it's probably the biggest industry in the world. It stretches everywhere. And now, as more and more people have been able to travel economically, more and more places see tourism, or really the movement from where they live and are based, not as a privilege, but as a right. So the movement, right? So now, you know, you don't find many people who are coming out of a four-year college degree that haven't had at least a semester abroad, right? So people are seeing movement, physical movement, as a part of their education and as a part of their right to, you know, take a part of this massive international tourism industry that exists. And they're growing through it. Right?
Yeah.
But that too has to do with the kind of protections that we need for all the special places on Earth, and for the preservation and you know, protection one place at a time, so that people are really saying, this is our place, right? This is what the place is about. This is how it's distinctive from every place else on Earth, and we're responsible for it. So we're maturing toward that.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Whenever you're ready to go ahead, Kelly. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Perfect. Okay. So, yeah, when I think about this question, I'd first like to recall a conversation I had with an elder farmer who's local to my area, who is also a leader in his community and a mentor to many young farmers and students. I remember in a conversation we had, him telling me that he was afraid that climate change would dissuade young people who are interested in agriculture from pursuing a career in a life, really a life in farming. He told me about how unpredictable, risky, and even dangerous farming can be in our region, where we often experience extreme heat, high winds, drought, ice storms, and other terrifying conditions. Just last weekend, and the week before, we had tornadoes. We had severe, severe damage in our region. And so he was sharing how young people, perhaps even more than ever, are keyed up to the risks of climate change and find themselves asking if it's even worth it to try farming, to try agriculture. I remember him saying that the financial strain is so heavy and so burdensome, can be really difficult to access land, to access the equipment and the infrastructure to even start farming. And then perhaps you even get a loan, but what are the terms of those loans? And do they actually support a farmer who is starting out? And at what point can they even see some profit? So the question came up, why would someone risk their health, their livelihood, their finances, and their relationships for at times a dangerous and at times a thankless job? So when I heard this, it made me worry about the state of local food systems, especially in my region. And it made me think, who would grow our food locally if young farmers are not incentivized, protected, and supported? And I also want to sort of be specific here too, that we're talking about growing specialty crops like tomatoes and berries and squash and corn and all of these wonderful things that we love to eat seasonally. In Arkansas, we have a lot of commodity crops like soy and other grains, rice. And so when I think about local farmers in our region, I think about who is going to grow those specialty crops that's really going to be specific and local and regional, and are also foods that we love to eat and enjoy seasonally. So, in this conversation, he also told me young people are more and more interested in sustainable and regenerative agriculture practices than previous generations. And he told me they see the risk and the errors of past generations, perhaps even in their own families, and they want to do things differently. They see the challenges of capitalism, they see the challenges of getting a bank loan, they see the challenges of this ever-present command to like do more, make more, produce more, and they're opting out. They want to find ways to honor the land, to work with the land, but also to protect it and to preserve it and to have it be a sustainable space. So this conversation actually gave me hope, and it inspired me and reaffirmed me to really think about how we can support young people, support young farmers and agriculture workers, and to really listen to them and to be active and open in that listening. The spiritual teacher Ram Dass said very simply, "How can I help?" And so I come back to that when I think about this work. How can I help? And so in sharing this story, my hope is also to model the profound power and impact of storytelling and of listening and learning from our elders, which are core and protected principles as food as medicine, as I understand it.
Mm.
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you. I think that leads us right into our next question. Judy, if you had anything to ask of Kelly, you may. But if not,
I think one of the things I'd like to tag on to before we lose the thought is regenerative ag. So, I live in Minnesota now, and it's just the beginning of, the farmers markets aren't even open yet. It's not harvest time yet, right? Just got warm. So I pledged last year that instead of just supporting farmers markets, I wanted to support people who were growing regenerative, right? Doing regenerative farming practices. And I wanted to find that at the farmers market or wherever I could find it. So just yesterday, got on the internet, typed in, there must be a national organization of regenerative farmers. By golly, there is. Closest one to me is 275 miles away in terms of people who belong to that organization. So my next call was to the farmers market, St. Paul, Minneapolis. I'd like to purchase from people who are doing regenerative farming. We don't have that. I mean, we don't know. So that notion of the regenerative is so powerful, right? Is the term, somehow to make people recognize it as much as they recognize what's organic, what's not organic, or it's a term that can really draw such interesting thinking. So I'm on the search.
Yeah,
It's my season of, right?
I love that. On the search.
Yeah. And, it's a little like wayfinding.
Mhm.
They're the people who are searching, that would be me, searchers, but then there have to be wayfindings and there have to be way showers.
Mhm.
What do we need to do in terms of way showing, getting to people to make that connection?
Yeah, thank you for that. Our next question is about two-eyed seeing, which Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall uses that term to conceptualize the coexistence of Indigenous and Western ways of knowing and to recognize the strengths of both approaches individually and in combination. And I'm wondering how each of you utilize that approach in your work in food as medicine. And who went first last time?
I think I did.
Okay, Kelly, you want to go first this time?
Sure. So when I think of two-eyed seeing, the concept I'd like to bring to mind is that of reciprocity. And I also want to name that reciprocity is a really important concept in the psychedelic worlds where I also spend some of my time. And just, sort of briefly, we sit with the understanding that so much of the work around plant medicine, whether that be psilocybin or even something like cacao, that those are first and foremost indigenous practices. And as they are coming more and more through this psychedelic renaissance through into modern culture, once again, we really need to be aware and cognizant of those origins and the significance of these medicines and of these plants to the cultures of which they belong. And so that is where reciprocity really becomes important. So I'll take a step back and say, first, I would encourage anyone from a Western background, which includes myself, who's endeavoring to incorporate food as medicine and indigenous principles. So, indigenous principles, perhaps of their region, but that do not reflect their own personal identity, into their work to ask themselves why. What is my intention and my purpose here? And how far am I willing to go in order to use these practices and use these principles or these traditions ethically so that I am in right relationship with those pieces, those practices that I might engage with. I think that too often Western conceptualizations of Indigenous wisdom is decontextualized, it's extracted, and it's repackaged to fit a Western model. And this entirely misses the mark and will only serve to perpetuate modern colonization and colonialism. So, from a Western perspective, I think it's certainly important to acknowledge, to name, and to take action to mend the wounds and burdens that have been inflicted on Indigenous peoples and the way that certain practices have been villainized in the past, and that might, come back in modern concepts and, be repackaged and now be okay or fine or safe or even popular. The one that comes to mind, just like right off the top, is smudging sage. I didn't know that that is a closed practice in Indigenous communities. And once I learned that, it really inspired me to like understand that and look into that and say, okay, why is this? And why is it that I can also buy like a stick of sage at Target if I wanted to, right? I think that that's something to investigate. So I think it's important that we recognize the power, the control, and the coercion that has historically been constant in our ways of knowing and being. And once we do this, we can lean into reciprocity. So I'm just going to be honest and straightforward here. And I think that in many ways in this space, educators, teachers, scholars, and so forth would agree that reciprocity necessitates money. just put your money where your mouth is. And this may look like funding community leaders, educators, research, education programs, events, community gatherings, and so on, that maybe you don't understand, or maybe is something new, but it's what's being asked for from that community that you want to serve. So we need to be diligent in honoring the autonomy, the self-determination, and the inherent ability for communities to be experts of their own situations, their own needs, their own preferences, their own people. And if we don't, we risk recentering Western ways under the guise of food as medicine, for example, or indigenous principles. So I think reciprocity is super important here. I think when I think of the Western ways of knowing and indigenous ways of knowing, there's space for all of it, but we really need to understand like who has power, who has control, what are we saying is okay and safe and popular, and useful, and why. And so I think a wonderful example of reciprocity is the Chircuna Institute launched the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas in 2021, with the aim to decolonize philanthropy by creating a pool of funds that supports Indigenous initiatives with no strings attached. Addressing everything from food security and environmental health to economic and educational support, cultural conversation, or not conversation, conservation, and more. So I'll share that link in this chat. I think that that's really great. And I really just want to highlight this idea of like providing philanthropic money or even public funds to Indigenous initiatives or anything in that spirit with no strings attached. Without this expectation that, yes, you can do this work, but you need to do it in the way that we want you to do it. I think that totally misses the point. And so, yeah, I think Tricuna has a really awesome program, an initiative around this work. And so I will drop that in here for anyone who is interested. And then I'll close my piece out there.
Thank you so much. I'll definitely be looking more into that after this call. I just opened the tab so I don't forget. Judy, whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, you just stimulated in me. I was going to talk about authenticity, which is a huge topic. Would take many, many hours to work our way through what does authenticity mean. Instead, I'm going to shift to interpretation. You know, one of the things in travel is that people have taken upon themselves everywhere to post signs along the road in places where they think something that was important to them happened. So you have thousands of groups around the country who have posted things saying this is a historical marker saying this, or here's an interpretive center for this town and here's what's important, right? And all of a sudden, as this, we are in the midst of a shift. And in terms of interpretation for travelers, right, it's a sea change. So the basic question is now being asked is, oh, look, there are 3 storyboards there. The first question was, where's the story of Native Americans? Right? So that's the first question. The second question is, what other voices who have been attached to this place that are not here? Where's their story? Right? Who decided what stories would be told about this town? Right? And now people are starting to say, well, there's a choice. Well, yes, you have to participate, but there's a choice. And what I see coming now, I would say there's probably no state in the union that hasn't hired a consultant to run out and look at the language on signs that are in the landscape that were put out by the State Historical Society, right? By local groups, that don't have language that's at best inaccurate, at worst, right? Just wrong ethically. And states are saying, wow, do we have any of those signs? And the answer everywhere, 100% of the places is, yes, we do. Signs are coming down, right? People are saying, God, we don't have budget to redo this. And you think, well, I hope they don't have budget until they all also have time, take the time to say, who should redo these? So there is a sea change afoot all across the country. And you know, the national park system, state parks, all the national lands people, everyone's starting to participate. Some because they had foresight or they said, wow, that has to do with us. And others are just being dragged into it because people are saying, have you seen that sign? Who shall I talk to about that? So that's two ways of seeing. That first way of seeing of let's hire a historian, and whatever that historian or that group of historians think is the most important theme, the most important thing, that's what we'll put out there for people to read, right? Thus reinforcing whatever people thought that place was about. And now it's who hasn't yet come to the table. And if they don't come by themselves, how are we going to go out and find them and invite them to the table? So I think it's, I'm very optimistic about all the change it's starting, and it's starting with a shift. And people are getting uncomfortable with what they have, which means that something new is coming. New voices. So that's what I'd like to contribute to that. I really see that we're in the midst of it. We're living it. Take a look at what's in your own town, your own state, your own public lands. Say, wow, should that be reconsidered? And then tell somebody. That's where the pressure's coming from.
It reminds me, both of your contributions are reminding me of the African proverb. I hope I don't butcher it, but it's something like, until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's beautiful. Yep, haven't seen that. It's lovely.
Thank you both for sharing those things.
I just want to briefly say, Judy, I really appreciate in your share too, the way that you highlight this feeling of hope, this feeling of newness, something along the horizon, and this idea that there's always space for new ideas and creativity and innovation and collaboration.
I think there, you know, life refreshes itself.
Mhm.
The friend that there was a new baby in their family, and I saw them yesterday, and it wasn't just the mother that was aglow, the family was aglow. So that new life refreshes everything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. So we've only got a few minutes left here. I'd like to take those last few minutes to first have each of you define the theme that we are here to discuss today. So that is cultural practices within food as medicine. So what does that look like to each of you?
I'll take that one first.
All right.
I just boiled it down like you know, boil something down to the essence of tomato or the essence of whatever it was. And I thought about this. It was such a good question. And what food as medicine looks like to me is this. It looks like the Awamni restaurant in Minneapolis, Awamni fine dining. It looks like the Indigenous Food Lab in Minneapolis. And it looks like the Food Lab, which is offering to Indigenous chefs around the country. We'd like to share how to do this in your place. So there's switching the whole notion of food as people are suffering with, God, if I just didn't eat so much sugar, right? I don't know how to get out of this, right? If only I could do this more, do that more. And just this, again, you know, I'm lucky enough to be in Minneapolis to get the ripple effect of Awamni. right? And this chef who is a great communicator, so people catch on to what he's doing, right? And what he started. But that's what it is. Food is medicine, as opposed to, and in terms of food as medicine, the other thing is that to look at it is how to build a life as opposed to fix a medical problem.
Thank you. And
Welcome.
Kelly, your definition of cultural practices within food as medicine, what does that look like to you?
Sure. So I'd like to highlight just some themes that I think came up in our conversation today that feel like cultural practices in food as medicine. The first, storytelling. We've shared a lot of stories today. We've passed information, tradition, emotions, ethics, and values through our own personal narratives. And this is also shared through song and through art. Again, the concept of reciprocity, which to me feels like the idea of letting folks be the experts of their own situations and their own needs and supporting that wholeheartedly, with no strings attached and no like preconceived outcome that must happen. Um, Also supporting local food systems, starting with our farmers and especially with young farmers. Also honoring connection to the land through all means, including but not limited to agriculture, recreation, tourism, study, and spirituality. Another theme that comes to mind for me is self-determination and self-sovereignty, being able to respect every individual's rights to choose what is right for them and for those that they love. And then centering Indigenous voices. If, like me, you find yourself called to this work, but you don't identify as Indigenous to the region that you are supporting and that you're engaging with, um, really engaging in exploration of what your place is in this work and how you can be of service to the inclusion and centering of Indigenous voices and wisdom. And then finally, keeping things in context and avoiding extracting the wisdom or the practice or the knowledge for the sole purpose of being like, here's this thing that we did. This is the food is medicine thing. But we've now repackaged it and we've reshaped it to make it perhaps more palatable to perhaps a Western audience. So just really being aware of that misstep. And that's how I see cultural practices in food as medicine.
Thank you. And if you would like to end us out with a call to action, so we don't do what you just said and have this be just a conversation that starts and ends in this room for our benefit, what would you like to see? Individual next steps or actions that you would like to see happen in your field and work or life in this food as medicine space?
Absolutely. So again, I'm putting on my therapy hat, and this is a practice and work that we do so much, hopefully, and also because I do exist in the psychedelic space, this is also very important, is we talk about our shadows and doing shadow work. And so the shadow is this hidden yet ever present and sometimes even dominant part of us that guides our why, our reasons for doing certain things. And we must all confront our shadows and think about why we do the things that we do, what drives us. So when I think about engaging in this work, we have to ask, what is our shadow why? What is the shadow that is existing in this work for us? And so some common themes that can come up for folks are our shadow has this desire to be seen as good, or has a desire to heal our own suffering. Perhaps our shadow is to be seen as an authority on a subject, or to be seen as right, to be seen as ethical, to gain power, to gain success, to gain notoriety. So I think that especially when we come into this work as food as medicine, we cannot enter and remain in this work ethically if we don't know why we're here in the first place and what drives us to stay. So my call to action would really be investigating that shadow work and allowing that to be just an ever evolving learning process. There's no stop point. We always come back and re-engage.
Nice.
Great reminder. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Judy, close us out today. What is your call to action?
Okay, here's my call to action. So, for food as medicine, lots of times the pressure's always on the people who are in the place, the small communities, the farmers, the producers, right? So I'd like my call to action to be about the travelers themselves and their part in this formula of connection. The first thing is to honor and to help come up with ways to help people in a quest for health and wellness. So as they strike out and decide where to go, how to travel, what to do with themselves, are they looking, right, for health and wellness, not only for themselves, but for the communities they enter, right? They pass in and out of, that's a first. And then the twin for that is even more powerful. And to have people continue to search for meaningful destinations. And in my work, I continue to work with people who make up the community and to ask them, I can tell them, I can feel your connection, right? But what's at the core of the meaningfulness of this place and your connection to it? And how can you give travelers a glimpse of that so they know they've been here and they've been to a special place? So in many ways, it's an honoring.
What a
So
great note to end on.
yeah, so I think I'll just leave it right there.
Yeah, it's a great note to end on, Judy. Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for this time. It went so fast. Can't believe it's already 12:30. Really appreciate you both taking time to be here today and have this conversation with each other and with me.